They told her she wasn't strong enough. They laughed when she stumbled. But Claire Donovan was never here to prove them wrong. She was here to prove what's right. The heat in Riverton doesn't come from the desert. It rolls off sunstruck granite in a wide Colorado sky, draping the police training compound in a dry shimmer. Claire Donovan stands at the edge of the range with 20 others, the only woman in a line of boots and bravado. Maybe you've seen a moment like this, when a person is measured by rumor before they're measured by truth. She tightens the strap on her vest, lets the weight settle into familiar grooves at her shoulders, and fixes her gaze on the plywood silhouettes blinking in the glare. A whistle shrieks. Boots shuffle. Someone snickers. Claire breathes in, steady and unremarkable, the way stones breathe under the sun. Riverton doesn't advertise itself. It is brick and river wind and coffee steam rising from corner windows, rail lines that hum at dawn, porch flags faded by high-altitude sun. Claire lives on the east side in a small walk-up with a locked steel cabinet and a view of the Rocky Sharp as a promise. The apartment smells faintly of gun oil that no lemon cleaner can erase. On the wall hang 2 photographs, her parents grinning at her college graduation, and a dusty shot of a unit gathered in front of an armored truck in a country that still visits her dreams with the sound of rotors and gravel. There is no framed resume on the mantel, no trophies, no hints of the years between. The cabinet keeps its counsel. So does she. Her mornings start at 4:30. 3 miles through streets still holding the night's cool, a metronome of footfalls past sprinklers and sleeping trucks. Push-ups in the narrow hallway. Deadlifts on a bar she stores beside the coat rack. The ritual sands the edges off memory and makes space for the voice she wears to work. 911, what's your emergency? She can say it in her sleep, and some nights she does. The headset has been her bridge back to ordinary life, guiding, steadying, never seen, always there. On the worst shifts she goes home hearing the echo of callers long after the line is clicked dead, then puts the echo on a shelf and laces her shoes anyway. On Friday she claims a booth at Blue Ridge Diner, eggs over easy, black coffee, the kind of waitress who remembers your sister's name. Emily calls between hospital rounds, voice warm even when her feet are tired. How's training? Orientation today. You ready? A small pause, private as prayer. Ready isn't the point. The call ends, and Claire watches the neon script vault across the chrome of the coffee machine while a freight train moans over the river bridge. The town moves forward, unbothered by whoever wins or loses a morning on a range. She picks up her check and moves forward too. At the precinct, introductions travel faster than facts. Detective Ryan Gallagher's laugh carries from the squad room like a crow. The dispatcher? On SWAT. He doesn't lower his voice. In the stairwell, 2 rookies go quiet when Claire rounds the landing, their grins snapping into masks of professionalism. Chief Harold Whitaker shakes her hand in his wood-paneled office and smiles past her shoulder at Deputy Chief Alan Mercer. We value initiative, he says, the way some men say weather. Outside, Captain Miguel Alvarez meets her in the hallway and offers a real look, the kind that takes a measure without sharpening a knife. You'll be fine, he says, and means it. Day 1 on the compound, Lieutenant Mark Holloway barks names off a clipboard that knows more than it has earned. Donovan. His eyes measure and dismiss in the same breath. Sergeant Ethan Cole flicks a battered whistle on its lanyard and mutters something about equal standards. The sun is impartial. It presses on everyone the same, burns the lip of every rail, turns sweat into stinging lines across the brow. Claire lets the heat do its work. She keeps her hands steady and her mind narrow as a sight picture, refusing the bait of every sideways grin and drifting joke. The morning builds from stretch to drill to the first slow walkthrough of the obstacle lanes. Wood and steel smell like shop class and rainless days. Someone's boot accidentally scrapes her heel, a chuckle ripples down the line and dies when Holloway glances up. Claire doesn't look for the culprit. She calibrates instead, distances to cover, angles to hold, the cadence of commands, the way Holloway's jaw tightens when she keeps pace without comment. She files each detail the way a medic files vitals, without judgment, for later. Beyond the fence, forklifts beep at a construction site. A school bell rings somewhere down in the valley. Mountains lean blue at the horizon, a line that never hurries and never apologizes. Life continues its ordinary route while Claire steps onto a different one. She can feel the old world tug, the headset waiting on her dispatch desk, the rhythm she is good at, safe at. But safety is often only another name for waiting, and she has been waiting since the day a teammate bled under a sky that looked exactly like this one. She is not here to be rescued by new rules. She is here to meet the old ones on their own ground. Holloway calls for a timed equipment assembly. Plates, straps, radio, mask. Hands along the line blur with practiced motion. Claire's fingers move with quiet economy, a language learned long before this morning. Cole strolls past and taps her radio with a knuckle, testing or tempting fate. It crackles and steadies. She doesn't look up. She is not here to win a hallway argument. She is here for the ledger that matters: seconds, accuracy, composure. At lunch she takes her sandwich to a sliver of shade by the fence. Gravel crunches, Alvarez sits beside her without asking permission, which is its own kind of respect. "They're not all against you," he says. "Some are just watching to see if the story they were told is true." Claire wipes mustard from her thumb and studies the targets winking in the heat. "Then they'll need better storytellers," she says. Alvarez huffs a short laugh, surprised into it. "Keep showing up." He rises, and the gravel speaks for him as he goes. Afternoon lays a heavy hand on the field. The group moves to flow drills through mock doorways and narrow corridors. Cole uses her as the demonstration for what not to do, and she lets him. She follows, corrects, repeats, until muscle does what mind intends. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Work. Gallagher passes the range on his way to somewhere else and throws a theatrical salute. She doesn't return it. Whitaker and Mercer appear for a moment on the catwalk like men observing weather from a safe distance, then vanish into the cool of administration. Maybe this is the part where you expect someone to rescue her with a speech. That isn't how Riverton works. Here you learn the terrain, count your breaths, and step when the ground is solid. As the sun slips behind a warehouse roof, Holloway dismisses the line. Boots scrape. Laughter loosens. Someone mutters, "See you tomorrow, dispatch." Claire strips the sweat-wet gloves from her hands and looks past the fence to the mountains keeping their own counsel. A small metal rides light in her pocket, smooth from years of being turned by a worried thumb. She doesn't take it out. She doesn't need to. She walks to her car with the slow certainty of a fuse burning toward a charge no one else can see. The door closes, the engine turns. On the dash, a sticky note in Emily's looping handwriting lists nothing important and everything that matters: water, food, sleep, breathe. Claire pulls onto the road, past the diner's neon, past the river's dark shoulder, toward the apartment where the cabinet will stay locked and the alarm will be set for 4:30. The day files itself away. Tomorrow will arrive whether anyone welcomes it or not. She will be there to meet it, as steady as a metronome, as patient as stone, carrying the quiet kind of promise that only hard ground and long shadows can keep. That quiet promise rides with her into the next dawn, steady as the alarms click at 4:30 in the cold water that wakes bone and will. Riverton is blue glass at that hour, the river a strip of pewter, freight lights winking like distant answers. By 7 she is back on the compound where heat, dust, and opinion burn out of the same sky. Holloway calls roll with a voice meant to ricochet off metal. Cole prowls the line like a man searching for a reason to blow his whistle. The morning smells of baked paint and old cordite, a scent that remembers other ranges, other lives. They begin with the orientation lane, a rehearsal meant to teach rhythm, not pride. On the third station, as Claire steps from rail to gravel, a boot angles out just enough to kiss the edge of her soul. The stumble is abrupt, loud, her kick kisses concrete and fans across the ground. Laughter breaks like dropped glass. Careful, dispatch, someone sings. Cole doesn't hide his grin. Holloway doesn't bother to look up when he says, "Some people are better suited to radios than rams." Claire kneels, gathers steel and nylon, and stands. As her jacket shifts, a small disc on a cord flashes once at her collarbone, seen by no one who's looking and everyone who isn't. The reset becomes a rhythm. Radios that worked for others turn to snow on her channel. A mask strap accidentally frays and snaps at the buckle. On the battering ram rotation, the extra weight finds her twice in a row. Equal standards, Cole chirps, while the men trade loads with winks she's meant to see. She answers none of it. She moves. She finishes. She inventories the ache later like bookkeeping, a quiet ledger with columns for shoulders, hands, breath. At midday, Blue Ridge Diner is shade and chrome and the mercy of air that doesn't taste like dust. Claire takes a corner booth with coffee black as asphalt. 2 tables over, Gallagher retells the stumble as if he'd authored it. She looked like a deer on ice, he crows, the punchline easy, the audience easier. He glances up mid-laugh, meets her gaze, and the sound dies like a fork on tile. She lays cash under the saucer and leaves the cup full. The bell over the door rings the only true sentence in the room. Someone came, someone left. The summons arrives in week 4. Whitaker's office glows honey from old wood and polished badges. Mercer stands by the window in a posture that suggests consequence. "We appreciate your dedication," Whitaker says, smoothing a tie that doesn't need smoothing. "But the team isn't a place for experiments. You're indispensable at dispatch. We can open an operations coordinator slot, integral to SWAT logistics." Integral hangs in the air like cologne in a crowded elevator. Claire keeps her voice level. Policy affords any candidate the right to attempt qualification. Whitaker's smile thins. Policy is paper. The field is blood. She holds his stare. "I know the difference." When she leaves, she hears Mercer say, "Low, get me the standards." Improvement arrives on fresh letterhead. Briggs posts revisions, obstacle time shaved by 30 seconds, pull-ups raised from 5 to 12, a weapons disassemble, reassemble clause. No one trained this cycle. The line groans. Cole calls it sharpening the blade. During the test the men get coaching, breaths counted, grips adjusted, small jokes lobbed like life rings. When Claire steps up, clipboards discover silence. She grinds out the 12th pull-up on a tremor and a prayer, finishes the course with 3 seconds to spare, and strips her weapon to the table with hands that remember colder rooms. "Barely," Briggs mutters, pen tight. Barely is a word men use when enough isn't what they wanted. The locker room is a tiled echo of chlorine and talk. On Claire's door, a plastic tiara, glitter cheap and cruel, taped over a note that reads Princess of Diversity in a hand that tilts like a smirk. She peels both off, drops them into the bin, and drinks from her bottle. Salt bites her tongue. Someone filled it with brine. She pours the rest down a drain and doesn't look around to meet the joke. Outside, the wind scuffs dust across asphalt like a small animal testing a scent. By then the town has found its favorite question. The Riverton Gazette runs a column, Do Standards Serve or Bend? And a local station frames the debate without her name but with B-roll of a shadow crossing a range wall. In produce, a man studying peaches decides to study her. If you can't cut it, don't change it. She passes with bread and the patience of stone. At home, Emily's message waits in a fluorescent voice. You don't owe them your story. But you do owe yourself the truth of what you can do. Claire saves it, plays it once more, then lets the room go quiet. Morning opens with Holloway speaking of original standards and the sacredness of the bar. Cole sweeps the line with a look that promises purity and delivers theater. Drills taste like pennies. Claire flows through doorframes, keeps corners small, bleeds sweat through her collar. Mid-scenario her radio dies. She finishes blind, reading a partner's movement by bootfall and breath. Cole marks the board with a thin smile. Failure to communicate. In the doorway, Alvarez watches the pen stroke and lets the silence keep the record. Maybe you think change arrives with trumpets. In Riverton it comes disguised as repetition, as the 1000th rep that looks like the first but isn't. Claire learns the compound like a tracker learns a ridge, which gravel patches slip, which hinges moan, when Holloway's jaw means the afternoon will break, when Mercer's shadow on the catwalk means optics have become the task. Under the same sun that hardens paint into scab, she hardens patience into habit, counting breaths instead of insults, choosing form where anger would be easier. Week 5 ends where it often does, at the diner booth that doubles as a small square of ground. The waitress tops off her cup with a tilt that says, I see you, I'm not applauding, I'm here. At the counter 2 rookies audition the phrase tiara trooper like it's clever and not cruel. A freight train leans on its horn and pulls the afternoon forward. Claire studies the half-moons of grit under her nails, the tiny blisters graduating to callus. She thinks of the cabinet at home and what it keeps quiet. She thinks of the knot she ties in her hair, identical each morning, a small promise made with fingers. Monday brings a notice stapled to cork, final qualification week, observers present. The air changes around the words the way air changes before weather. On the range, the targets wait with their patient holes. In the hallway, Gallagher falls silent as she passes, not respect, more the hush men keep when a story leans toward its turn. Claire checks each piece of gear with the ritual that turns luck into hands and pockets the small medallion without looking. The week tightens around the compound like a tourniquet. Somewhere, someone is counting down for her. She isn't. She's counting up, breaths, steps, choices, toward the test built to prove a rumor right or wrong, toward a line no one else can cross for her. Final qualification week doesn't roar in, it tightens like a belt. Observers drift onto the catwalk, command staff in crisp shirts, a union rep with a practiced frown, a council aide pretending not to take notes. Holloway's voice is sandpaper at dawn. Cole's whistle hangs off his neck like a threat that wants a reason. The schedule posts in block print, stress shoots, obstacle lane under time, weapons strip and build, team flow. Friday is blank except for one word, course. Monday smells of metal baked too long in the sun. Radios chirp alive for everyone else, hers breathes static, then silence. She reads partners by elbow and shadow, finishing a room clear without a voice in her ear. Cole marks a failure to communicate in tidy letters, then tucks the board under his arm as if truth lived there. Alvarez says nothing, but his glance takes in the broken channel, the way she didn't flinch, the way the group learned nothing about her except that she refuses to stop. At lunch she hits Blue Ridge for 10 quiet minutes of coffee and breath. 2 recruits at the counter try the phrase "Tiara Trooper" on their tongues, young enough to think Clever and Cruel are cousins. She leaves her cup half full and the bell over the door draws a line between the room she can't fix and the work she can. Tuesday, Briggs unveils a surprise blind disassembly, goggles fogged, hands in gloves. Someone groans. Claire doesn't. Her fingers have filed these edges before, in places where sand got into everything, where oil turned to syrup at night. She lays the weapon out by feel, parts in neat order, a metronome counting in her head, then builds it back until the slide locks like a door that knows its frame. Briggs's pen hesitates over the clipboard and then moves. Time. Cole says nothing for once, which is its own kind of applause. The Gazette runs a poll, should standards bend, with a photo that isn't her but might as well be. At the grocery store a woman in scrubs eyes Claire's forearms, chalk lines of tape, the yellowing bloom of a bruise, and says, "I hope they don't lower anything." Claire thinks of the word lower and how it always seems to mean the floor you're not invited to stand on. She buys rice, frozen peas, sports tape. Wednesday is heat and repetition. Holloway sets the RAM rotation randomly and the weight finds her twice again. Her forearms sing, her shoulders buzz like wires in wind. She counts to 8 between breaths, a trick she learned the year life taught her to make space inside pain. A candidate behind her mutters, "She's dragging pace," and Holloway lets the comment hang, "A flyin' sun." She drives the ram into the hinge with form so clean Cole can't find a place to hook his grin. The door pops with a bark. On the catwalk, Whitaker leans to Mercer, and the two of them look like weathermen arguing with the sky. That night she stays late with permission and a broom closet key. The maintenance shed is a cave of rubber mats and chemical smell. She sets up a folding table, strips and builds until screws go where they belong because memory says so, not sight. She times herself on her cracked phone, scrawls numbers on masking tape, lowers each by slivers. When she finally sits, the world is a hum. The medallion presses a warm coin through the cotton of her shirt, and a younger voice walks through a door in her head, a laugh, then the snap of a lesson learned too late. She palms the coin, writes down another time, and chooses sleep over ghosts. Thursday arrives with cameras. A local station parks a van outside the gates. Cole grows theatrical, volume up 2 clicks, jabs at the line a little sharper for the viewers he's pretending don't exist. Original standards, folks. We're not here for politics. The word politics has a way of landing on one person even when it's thrown at everyone. Gallagher shows up for a look, hands in pockets, smile easy as a bar stool. "Big week," he says to no one, into her. Midday, Mercer randomly selects her for a gear inspection that turns into a seminar. Straps measured, stitching questioned, plates weighed. Holloway discovers a scuff and calls it a concern until Alvarez steps in with a single sentence, "Same issue on Parker's set yesterday, we signed it off." The room rebalances by an inch you can feel under your boots. Claire thanks neither man because thanks would make the help a spectacle. She puts the plates back in, hears them settle over bone like sentences handed down. By evening she is held together by tape and small decisions. Emily calls from a hospital linen closet where the only quiet in the building lives. "You're not in this to perform a miracle," Em says. "Just do the thing you've always done. Don't let the worst version of other people choose the size of your day." Claire laughs once, the sound like a doorstop catching a door. Copy. When they hang up, she stands still until stillness turns into fuel. Friday refuses drama. The sky is sullen, the wind indifferent. The compound hums like a stage before the curtain. They gather at the line, 11 men and Claire, all of them suddenly the same shape, helmets, vests, the human wish to be adequate. Briggs lays out the rules with the soft relish of a man who likes a difficult puzzle. Targets at varied distances, partial cover, position transitions, stressors. Safety rules are fireproof. Break 1, you're done. Cole pats a timer like a pet. Holloway prowls the catwalk with a gaze that tests, then judges, then dares someone to argue with the verdict. The first candidate runs hard, fast enough to bleed accuracy. The second is careful and loses time in the seams between movements. Somewhere in the middle a jam blooms in the heat and eats a man's rhythm. Claire watches not to memorize their mistakes but to remember her own cadence. She notes where gravel drifts deeper, where a step wider than necessary costs a breath. She keeps her shoulders low, her mind narrower than a sight picture, and her breath steady in a count of 4. Behind them, Gallagher leans to another detective and whispers money into the air. 10 says she doesn't clear the back plate. The comment floats down and tries to land. It doesn't stick. Alvarez finds his place just off to the side, not close enough to be accused of caring, not far enough to miss the truth when it shows up. When Holloway finally says, "Donovan," the range contracts to the size of a doorway. She steps forward and the world edits itself. The scoreboard blinks zeros. The wind forgets to move. She checks her sidearm with a precise economy that looks like calm even if it isn't. Her hands tremble once, then learn their job again. She slides the spare magazines where they've always gone, sets her feet in the square where others have stood and left sweat and hope. She reaches beneath her collar and touches the coin, not for luck but for scale, to remember what matters and what doesn't. She doesn't watch the catwalk. She doesn't consider the camera's glass eye. She lets the range collapse into angles and beats and lines she can step across. Holloway lifts a hand. Cole's thumb hovers over the timer. Claire breathes in on 1, out on 2, in on 3, out on 4. She stops counting up only long enough to let silence stand between her and the choice she's already made. The buzzer waits at the edge of her next breath. She did, and the words were soft enough to fit in a cupped hand and hard enough to crack stone. "I've been looking for you for 2 years, Collins said, eyes steady. Widow 27. The name hung there, simple and radioactive. Emily didn't flinch, but something in her shoulders unlocked, as if a door she'd braced with her whole body finally gave. The corridor, the heat, the idling engines, all of it narrowed to the distance between two people who understood the same language without ever having met. "Not here," Collins added, shifting the moment from secret to stage. "Range. Now." Word outran them the way brushfire outruns wind. By the time they reached the east line, a low crowd had formed, administrators trying to look casual, instructors pretending to be busy, recruits with eyes too bright. Ryan arrived last, too fast and too friendly, a lacquered smile he couldn't get to dry. "General, if you'd like a proper demonstration," he began, sliding himself between problem and solution like he'd practiced. "My advanced cadre can..." "Stand down, Captain," Collins said, not raising her voice. "We'll observe Instructor Carter." The captain's grin sagged a degree. He stepped back, but not far. Emily moved with that same quiet economy that made rooms recalibrate. She lifted a rifle from the rack like it was an old conversation she still remembered by heart. She checked chamber, bolt, optic, safety, rituals 1,000 times repeated. The watch band rode up. XXVII flashed. No one breathed. Standard plates, the range master offered, trying to be helpful. No, Collins said. Walk it. She meant, start where everyone starts and keep going until there's nowhere left to go. Emily started at 50 yards, not because she needed to, but because fundamentals are a kind of faith. Breath. Press. Follow through. The first group erased the center like a mouth closed on a secret. She pushed to 100, then 2, then 3, each string tidy, surgical, almost boring in its correctness. When the murmurs began, she shifted to movers, let the track whisper past, rode the swing, broke shots at the exact kindness of the curve. Brass ticked on concrete like rain. Mirage wobbled in the heat, she read it and held a hair high. The rifle obeyed. Ryan's crew traded glances that weren't jokes anymore. He drifted toward the range master again, a moth still convinced the lamp was a flower. Unpredictable cadence, he murmured. Make it interesting. Targets stuttered in odd rhythms, some full silhouette, some quartered off, some half-hidden at angles that punished arrogance. Emily didn't rush. She let math be patient. 1 shot per problem. No waste. The whole count climbed without drama. The air felt thinner. Build her a lane, Collins said at last, and the range master, who had been here long enough to remember real shooters, understood. They threw a problem set that did not belong in a manual, near-far sequencing, partial cover, offhand transitions, a steel swinger tucked behind a no-shoot, a hostage plate that punished vanity. 90 seconds would be fair. 60 would be unkind. Timer, someone asked. Emily shook her head once. No theater, no heroics. You'll know, she said. When she moved, the room moved with her. A step, a mount, a breath, a break. Closed plates snapped like light switches. Far steel gave back its clean, bell-thin answer. She switched shoulders around a barrel without thinking about it, eyes never leaving the problem, feet telling the rest of her where to be. At the hostage plate, she let the world shrink to a single coin width of mercy and took it without apology. Last target, a staggered micro at the rim of confidence. She paused the space of a heartbeat, felt the wind's small hand on the bullet's ear, and corrected no more than a comma. The plate rang. Silence followed, a true silence, the kind that doesn't fear noise so much as disrespecting it. Emily safed and cleared the rifle like it had never been a weapon at all, only a tool that had done its work. She placed it on the bench and turned. A bird called somewhere beyond the berm. No one else did. Collins stepped forward into the quiet she had ordered into existence. Instructors, she said, voice carrying without heat, meet Emily Carter. Operational call sign Widow 27. She didn't have to ask for attention. She already owned it. 15 years in places you've only seen on briefings. 27 high-value targets interdicted with precision. Intelligence work that stopped coordinated attacks on American soil, thousands spared, whether they ever know her name or not. She let that hang, then pointed at the scars that had been punchlines an hour ago. These were earned pulling children out of a burning vehicle in Helmand after an IED ripped her team apart. 30% burns. She covered the medevac anyway. The kids lived. A sound moved through the crowd that wasn't applause and wasn't a groan. It was something like shame finding its shape. Ryan's cheeks had gone the color of paper. He opened his mouth, habit, not strategy, but nothing came. Collins' eyes found him like a laser finds paint. Captain Cooper, we will discuss your command climate. Nothing in the sentence was loud. Everything in it was final. Emily didn't look at him. She looked past him, at the recruits, at Olivia with her hands clasped tight and her breath held like a prayer, at Bill leaning on nothing, face carved out of old weather and quiet victories. "I don't do ceremonies," Emily said, not as a deflection but as a boundary. "I teach basics. People get to go home because they know the basics." Collins nodded, a general who understood that glory is a poor diet. "Then teach," she said. "And I'll make sure the right students find your door." For a long beat, nobody moved. The brass cooled. The targets waited to be patched. The sun leaned closer to its evening. Emily gathered a stapler, a roll of pastors, a cardboard backer, small tasks, simple repairs. Work steadied the air. Around her, posture changed. Men who had laughed earlier studied the ground with new interest. The range master cleared his throat and found a broom. Ryan tried to inhabit his body in a different way and discovered he did not yet know how. Bill stepped near enough to be heard by only 2 people. "Knew there was thunder," he said, voice like gravel rolled in a calloused hand. Emily's mouth tilted into something that didn't quite reach smile but lived in the same neighborhood. "It's quieter, these days," she answered. "Quieter's fine," Bill said. "Quieter keeps people breathing." Collins turned to go, then paused as if remembering a piece of business she refused to let become paperwork. "There's a medal with your name on it in D.C., she said over her shoulder. "We can argue about that later." The convoy doors waited like punctuation. The general left the sentence open, on purpose. Then tears the air open. Claire moves. The first target stands at conversational distance and she ends the conversation with 3 center hits that sound like a sentence written in steel. She pivots low, economy over flourish, heel kissing gravel where others scattered it earlier, muzzle driving before her eyes follow. Target 2 falls in 2 beats. Her breath writes a simple math, 4 in, 4 out, that her hands can solve without supervision. Position change. Knees find the deck, elbows stack, sights settle. She rides the wobble to stillness and presses, not yanks, 2 clean holes where a rookie would have chased one. The catwalk murmurs. Holloway paces. Cole's thumb floats above the timer like a hawk over a field. She ignores both. A wall simulating cover becomes a partner. She leans and trades angles the way a carpenter trades planes, shaving seconds where pride would waste them. A target peeks from behind partial cover and she threads a shot through a postage stamp of daylight, then moves as if the floor itself asked politely. Halfway, the gun coughs and locks. Of course it does. The jam is the kind that eats rhythm and gives back panic. Claire's hands say not today. Tap, rack, roll, the ritual learned where dust made machines into opinions, clear, confirm, continue. Time doesn't forgive, but it sometimes forgets. The timer forgets to punish her for not flinching. On the catwalk, Whitaker leans forward for the first honest time this week. Mercer stops writing. Alvarez doesn't move at all, as if any endorsement would be theft. Kneel to prone. The gravel grinds her sleeves, the sights are a horizon and then a horizon smaller than a dime. She does not chase perfection, she lets it arrive. 2 more hits. Up again, economy of muscle, the kind of motion that doesn't ask permission from doubt. She rounds the last barricade into the long lane people whisper about in locker rooms, the plate set so far it looks like a dare, a rumor that weeds out almost everyone. Her breath stays on 4. The world narrows until the target is the only polite thing left to look at. She sights like she's measuring a promise. A breeze fingers the range and dies. Claire presses. The last round flies a truth no one can edit. The plate rings with a tone that cuts through talk and finds bone. Silence lands hard enough to leave a mark. Cole blinks. Holloway's jaw ticks. Briggs checks the clipboard, checks the screen, checks himself. The clock freezes on a number the compound hasn't seen. 12 seconds better than the posted best. Accuracy a clean ledger. No one quite remembers how to breathe. Gallagher mutters, "You've got to be," and doesn't finish. Someone on the catwalk drops a pen and the small clatter sounds like weather breaking. Whitaker turns to Mercer with the expression of a man watching a map redraw a coastline. The timer still glows. It is not a rumor. It is not generous. It is simply there. Claire safeties, locks open, and presents the weapon the way you offer back a borrowed tool. Cole takes it without his usual theater. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" The question arrives from everywhere and nowhere, sincerity smuggled inside skepticism. Claire's voice is clean, neither loud nor shy. Army marksmanship instructor. 5th Special Forces support team. She doesn't give them the years or the nights or the 3 names that live under that sentence. She adds, almost kindly, "It's in my file." Briggs looks like he wants to argue with paper. Holloway feels for a phrase and finds none. Alvarez finally allows himself a breath that sounds suspiciously like pride left loose. On the fence line, the wind returns and drags a thin snake of dust across the lane she just crossed. The scoreboard keeps glowing, unbothered by politics. Reporters will eventually find the number, they always do. Polls will mangle it into opinions, and a union email will frame it as proof of something it isn't. That will be later. Now, the range is a church after the hymn. People stand up different from how they sat down. Claire slides the medallion back against her chest and feels the steady weight of a coin that remembers a promise. She does not smile big. Victories that matter rarely ask for confetti. She collects her magazines, nods once to Alvarez, and steps off the line the way she stepped onto it, not performing, not pleading, simply making the ground tell the truth. And the ground answers, not with applause but with a number that refuses to lie. The scoreboard's glow follows her into the hallway where sound returns in awkward pieces, throats clearing, boots scuffing, the soft click of a pen finally capped. Briggs signs a line he cannot edit. Holloway finds a nod that costs him something and pays it anyway. Cole hands back her weapon without a quip, as if words have weight he can't afford right now. Alvarez meets her eyes and grants a single, quiet yes that doesn't need a sentence wrapped around it. By evening the compound is a switchboard of whispers. Phones do what phones do. A clip of steel-on-steel travels faster than policy. The Gazette trades question marks for exclamation points. A local station leads with the number and a silhouette that is no longer anonymous. At Blue Ridge Diner the regulars practice casual, then fail. The bell over the door rings and heads turn as if the sound carried context. Claire orders coffee she won't drink and leaves bills under the saucer like a truce offering to a town learning how to watch without picking sides out loud. Whitaker moves quickly because the wind has shifted and he can smell weather. The next morning a podium sprouts in the lobby, flags at attention, microphones like small black birds. "Excellence above all," he says, and it lands well because it's true, even if he came to the truth late. Mercer stands at his shoulder and nods the way men nod when they've sent emails at midnight. Cameras blink. A reporter asks about standards and Whitaker smiles the practiced smile that says they were never the problem. Somewhere behind the cameras, Alvarez watches Claire letter by letter, making sure the word historic doesn't swallow the word earned. Behind doors, another weather pattern moves. Internal Affairs opens a folder that someone slid under the right desk. Not a manifesto, just a string of messages about discouraging the wrong fit, a checklist of inconveniences disguised as rigor. The names aren't shouted, they're documented. Holloway is reassigned to inventory oversight, his clipboard traded for barcodes. Cole rotates to patrol training to share field experience. Briggs receives a memo about coaching equity that reads like a mirror held at an angle. No public spectacle. Just a map redrawn a few blocks at a time. The culture adjusts by inches. Jokes shrink, then stop. Rookies catch the look from older hands and swallow clever before it turns cruel. Gallagher corners her in a corridor where the air tastes like printer toner and apology. "I was wrong," he says, the words heavy as if they've been in his pocket too long. Claire doesn't polish it for him. Make sure the next woman doesn't need a record to be believed. He nods, and the nod is a small brick laid where a wall used to be. Briggs approaches her after a briefing with an offer that sounds like redemption. "Lead marksmanship for the team," he says, as if handing over a banner. She tries the weight of it and sets it down. "I'm here to be part of the team, not the headline," she answers. He startles, then respects the math. Titles can be cages with nicer locks. Change needs a shape, so she gives it one that isn't a press release. On off days she books an empty corner of the range and opens it to anyone who wants harder work than rumor provides. A handful of women show first, then a few men who care more about groups than gossip. She teaches not shortcuts but standards, how to move without leaking time, how to breathe until your hands believe you, how to keep form when circumstance wants your fear. She doesn't advertise. Word spreads the way competence does, person to person, earned to earned. The din around her fades into hum. Uniforms that once turned away now pause to ask, "What do you see in my grip? Where are my bleeding seconds?" She answers with small, specific verbs. In the locker room, the tiara era ends without a eulogy. On the catwalk, when leadership passes, they see work instead of a narrative to manage. Emily calls between shifts and says, "Proud of you," in a voice that never needed a scoreboard to find its pitch. Weeks stretch into a rhythm that feels like a future. Then a morning snaps it. Dispatch lights up with a word that rearranges breath: hostage. Summit Plaza Tower. 10th floor. Former employee. Rifle. 14 trapped. Claire arrives under a sky the color of static. SWAT forms its dark line against glass and rumor. Inside the mobile command, maps flower across monitors. The main stairwell is a kill funnel, the freight elevator is a guess you don't take when lives are on the other end. Claire studies the building guts and finds a thin artery, a service corridor tucked behind utility closets, a crawl of metal and drywall that threads to the office from an angle the suspect hasn't considered. She doesn't pitch it like genius. She offers it like a tool. Distraction on the main. One officer through the service run. His blind side opens. The team leader tests the plan against what-ifs and it doesn't break. Claire is placed on the primary stack, reasonable, cautious, a way to include her without betting the house. Another operator takes the crawl. The entry runs to the beat of practiced breath. The suspect turns toward noise, meets shadow from behind, and surrenders to a voice he didn't expect. 14 people come down blinking into daylight that suddenly feels earned. Debrief is simple, the best kind. "Donovan's corridor saved minutes we didn't have," the leader says, and Briggs lets it land in the room. No fanfare. No revisionist history. Just credit where the map bent to someone who bothered to look twice. In the garage afterward, Alvarez leans against the fender and gives her that half-smile again. "This is the work," he says. "Not the cameras." She nods. "It's always been the work." By the end of the month, HR rolls out changes that read like common sense to anyone who's ever touched a stopwatch: standardized gear checks, random rotations for extra loads, blind scoring on quals, documented coaching cues applied to all. No banner headline. Just fewer places for bias to hide. In the range light, Claire runs drills beside people who used to measure her with smirks and now measure themselves against the clock. The medallion is no longer hidden, it sits against her sternum, not as an advertisement but as a scale she checks choices against. Riverton does what Riverton always does, keeps moving. Trains cross the river. Neon hums. The diner's coffee is still too strong. Claire wakes at 4:30, runs streets that know her cadence, and shows up where standards live. The number on the board has already begun to fade in the sun. That's fine. Numbers are mile markers, not destinations. What remains is steadier, a team less interested in who carries the ram and more interested in whether the door opens clean, a chief who has learned that policy is only honest when performance makes it so, a town that, for once, lets the ground tell the truth and then listens long enough to hear what it requires next. And listening, the place begins to adjust in ways small enough to miss and large enough to matter. Riverton sheds a few habits the way a town sheds winter, first a drip, then a creek. On a clear morning the range hums with recruits who don't know the old folklore, only the work in front of them. Claire sets cones, tapes corners, and lets the rhythm of instruction replace the rhythm of defense. The medallion rests where everyone can see it now, not as a banner but as a scale. Here's what weighs, here's what doesn't. She demos a door entry twice, slow enough for hands to memorize, fast enough for pride to stay quiet. Breathe on 4, she tells them. Move like you mean it. Let the timer chase you, don't chase it. Word traveled, 2 women in this class, a farm kid with wrists like cables and a former athlete who calculates angles as if she invented them. A man who once snickered at the rumor of Claire now keeps a notebook and asks smart questions. When a rookie on the bleachers mutters a line about quotas, the room goes still, not with outrage but with standard. Another recruit turns and says, simple as a rule of safety, knock it off. Culture shifts with fewer speeches than some people expected. After drills, a young woman sidles up, helmet tucked to ribs, voice soft as an apology. Ma'am, did you ever want to quit? Claire thinks about how quitting can wear costumes, a promotion that lets you disappear, a complaint that asks someone else to carry your day, a silence that pretends to be grace. Wanting is cheap, she says. Choosing is the expensive part. Pick something worth the price. The recruit nods like a person adding a number to a ledger she plans to balance. Upstairs, policy follows practice. HR's new playbook isn't flashy, just exact, blind scoring logged and posted, gear checks documented, rotations randomized by software instead of friendship. Whitaker signs off without flourish, Mercer builds spreadsheets like dikes against backsliding. Alvarez keeps doing the simple durable things leaders do, showing up, shutting down theater, asking the clock what it thinks before he asks a rumor. Briggs, chastened into curiosity, starts every critique with the same sentence, here's what you did right, and means it. Life returns to ordinary and stays changed anyway. Blue Ridge keeps coffee too strong and pie too sweet. Claire sits by the window some evenings, watching freight roll over the river while Emily texts a photo of nieces ankle-deep in a creek. Family dinner Sunday, the message reads, and Claire types the same reply she always does, count on it, then looks at her calloused palms and wonders when exactly steady became a better word than brave. In the apartment, the steel cabinet opens more often. Inside are the artifacts that once made her throat close, a faded patch, a letter folded to the soft of cloth, a photo where someone laughs who won't laugh again. She doesn't turn these into an altar. She turns them into a promise. If skills can prevent grief, then skills will be taught until grief runs out of places to hide. Months spool. The number on the board fades under sun but stays in people. Gallagher's jokes get sharper in the right direction. He saves the soft edges for apologies. Holloway puts in for retirement and leaves behind a room with more oxygen. Cole learns patrol training is harder when the point is to graduate better cops instead of replicas of himself. He adjusts, grudging at first, then with something like relief. The union email list shifts from grievance to guidance twice as often as it used to. No parades for any of it. Just the quiet commerce of grown-ups trading worse for better. A call comes late autumn, a barricade with a child tucked somewhere inside the floor plan. The team stacks, moves, and finishes as clean as the diagram hoped. After, in the garage where exhaust smells like metal and adrenaline turning into memory, the team leader claps Claire's shoulder once. "Your note on the stairwell saved a minute," he says. She thinks of minutes the way a medic thinks of air. "Spend them well," she answers, and the two of them understand exactly what that costs and buys. One evening she speaks to a room of cadets with sleeves rolled and pens ready. She doesn't sell triumph. She sells process. "You'll be judged by strangers, and sometimes they'll be loud," she says. "Let the ground judge you instead." The ground doesn't trend. It keeps score in seconds and straights. A hand rises. "How do you know when you've won?" Claire smiles the small kind. "When the next person doesn't have to prove what you had to prove. That's a win you may never get credit for. Get comfortable with that." The river keeps talking to its rocks. Snow rides down from the high country and salts the ridge with shine. Riverton tucks in without quite sleeping. At 4:30, an alarm earns its keep and Claire laces shoes by habit and by choice. Out on the street, a light switches on behind a diner counter, a dog barks at nothing, and the first train of the morning clears its throat. She runs past storefronts and porches in the corner where the range fence cuts the sky. Breath on 4. Footfall to metronome. Not performing, not pleading. Just telling the ground the story again until the ground agrees. Maybe you want a banner ending, a brass band and a speech. This town prefers function. The lesson fits that. Strength isn't the loudest sound in the room, it's the last habit standing when the noise burns off. Claire's record will be broken someday by someone she's never met. She hopes it happens soon. She'll be on the line that morning, the coin warm against her sternum, ready to nod once and move over an inch so there's room for the future. Courage, it turns out, is not a flame you wave, it's a pilot light you guard, patient, ordinary, undefeated, so others can see where the door is and carry the ram together without asking who deserves to touch it first.